Alrighty, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the North Carolina Growing Together webinar series. And our collaborators here at Central Carolina Community College and Lee County Small Business Center, Terry Brown has been so gracious to host us this year. This is our last webinar for the year. It's the last webinar for the NCGT series. But hopefully the Center for Environmental Farming Systems will be back with more webinars for the future, but we always have many, many resources for small businesses, entrepreneurs, food and farming operations. So we will continue to be a resource for you. So our last series today, we're very excited to have Lee Menius, who is a new hire at NC Choices, who is leading up a beginning farmer and rancher development program, and he'll be providing technical support. He's going to tell you a lot of information about the growing niche meat market in North Carolina that is rapidly growing, and we have a lot of support for this industry. So we're so happy to share this information with you today. So I'm not advancing.
Just
Click.
now you can advance.
Okay. Alrighty. So y'all know about the Zoom meeting platform. You will not be able to ask live questions, but I'll be monitoring those questions for Lee to have at the end. We do have an evaluation step at this time, so a live evaluation will pop up towards the end, and we need you to answer 2 quick questions for us. That's new. We do want, some of y'all might be on this webinar who are not aware of the role of small business centers in North Carolina. Small business centers are located at each community college in North Carolina and offer private, confidential advice for your small business startups or your growth opportunities. So this collaboration has been very deep and wide with NCGT and the small business centers around the state. So we encourage all listeners today who aren't familiar with your small business center to reach out and learn more about what they're doing. They are increasingly helping food and farming businesses around the state, so it's a great resource for you. You are automatically muted. This helps cut down on background noise, but please interact by using the Q&A box, and I will be sure and monitor that. After the webinar ends, you will receive a link to the YouTube video after we do maybe some minor edits, and you'll also receive a PDF version of the presentation, which allows you access to the links and the many resources that Lee will be talking about today. So thank you so much for supporting this series. We're really excited to end on this high note. The North Carolina Growing Together project has been working for the last 6 years on a USDA grant to help build farmer capacity, help with supply chain expansion, and create an enabling environment to support food and farming businesses. And this webinar series has been an effort to do that with the small business centers. So with that, I'll introduce Lee. We're very happy to welcome Lee back to the NC Choices team. Lee was here years ago when we were first launching NC Choices. He's an experienced farmer and food entrepreneur himself, and runs his own butchery and also farm, and he can tell you more about that. We're very excited that he's going to be working with beginning farmers who've been working on their meat production for 10 years or under over the next few years throughout North Carolina, and he's going to talk about that as well. And I have some links here for y'all to see what NC Choices offers. Lee will be going through all of these resources with you as well. But again, it's a very dynamic set of resources for small-scale meat producers in the state. And with that, I will hand it over to Lee. Lee, take it away.
All right. Yes. So yeah, as Laura introduced me, my name is Lee Menius. I'm Technical Services Coordinator for NC Choices, which is a program under the Center for Environmental Farming Systems at NC State, which is a program as a collaboration with NC State, NCA&T, and NCDA. NC Choices is kind of the niche meat service arm of CEFS. And so we do a lot with pasture raised producers and developing markets and around technical support in those areas. So to give you a little background, there's a lot of slides on here. So a few extra put in. I may or may not be able to spend a lot of time on some, but they'll be here, like you said, as so you can go back to the PDF version, or you can go back to the slideshow or this video and reference some of the later points. NC Choices provides technical assistance. We navigate the regulatory environment and do a lot of educational programming. The biggest thing we do is the Carolina Meat Conference, which is held about every year and a half, 2 years, and involves farmers, processors, regulatory agencies, and cooperative extension and other agencies involved in niche meat and working with farmers. Do a lot of workshops around technical training for not only just farmers and production-wise for pasture-raised systems, but also around processing and like I said, a lot of that dispersing regulatory information as it's given to us. So if you look at us kind of as this over here on the left-hand side is kind of the farm to fork movement. As you can see, there's kind of more farmers and more consumers on either end, and processors have traditionally been the bottleneck because of the small number of processors available for doing local meats. And so NC Choices programming is driven by the needs of the system. And what we do is we try to build capacity, which has, for the last several years, has been around increasing the processing capacity and processing ability of a lot of processors in North Carolina, and we've had some outreach that extended across the borders into neighboring states. We also work a lot with the cooperative extension and trading agents, or working with agents. This is traditionally niche meats, and direct marketing is traditionally not a wide knowledge base within a lot of our establishments. So we're there to help facilitate that and provide training, and also work with advocacy organizations to help influence, well, not really influence laws, but to help them make informed decisions about niche meat. So first question is, what is a niche meat? And so when we're referring to niche meats, and was generally referred to as locally pasture-raised meats that are sold directly into local markets. Of course, local is always a very subjective word and depends on who you're talking to and what their idea of local is. Usually these are all differentiated as something special, and that can mean anything from grass-fed organic down to the breeds used, to the feed programs, all the way down to having something special that was hugged and petted and loved on 3 times a day. And it's just something that helps develop a story. And that's what consumers want. They want to look at it and they want to know what that story is, because at the end of the day, it's not that you're selling a meat product, it's you're selling the story behind that meat product. And, you know, maybe the multi-generational farm, just something that makes that connection with the consumer. And so why niche meat production? And that's because consumers want that connection. And that's driven by the last 20 years of mad cow, E. coli, salmonella, and what could be described as a general trust/distrust of the food system in general. And so people want that connection with their food, and they want to look and say, hey, this is who I get my food from, and this is who I trust to feed myself and my family. Special claims, we were talking about those niche meats being grass-fed organic. Those are all considered special claims. So if you're working with a producer or you are a producer that's wanting to get into meat, be aware that those special claims do require approval, and that approval requires documentation, and there are forms that must be submitted to USDA label policy, and then that way those can be verified by the regulating agency. Those claims are owned by the establishment. So whenever you go to work with a processor and you want to do a grass-fed claim or an organic claim, then you need to file the paperwork, and usually the processors will either charge a little extra for that or give you the paperwork, say, here, you fill it out and then we'll turn it in. But once that claim is submitted, that claim for that label is owned by the establishment, not the farm. So if you're a farm and you decide to change processors and you still want to make that grass-fed claim, then guess what? You're going to have to do all that paperwork over again when you go to your next establishment. So it's not a super hard process, but not an easy one. You do need to make sure that you have that covered. Point of sale materials are considered labeling. So if you're selling at the farmer's market and you're making you have a sign there on your table that says 100% grass-fed beef, but you don't have a label claim that is actually verified, and that is on the label of your 100% grass-fed beef packages, that is actually considered false labeling. It's not something that's overly enforced. I have heard tell that it has been checked on a few times. I'm not aware of the consequences or outcomes of any of those, but just be aware that that is the case. And so if you're making claims at a farmer's market or at any other place, on your website, on your farmer's market, on the t-shirt you're wearing at the farmer's market, you may get called out on it. And generally, you're probably not going to get called out on it by a regulatory agency checking up on you. What you're going to get called out on it by your other farms are going to be the ones that turn you in. So if you're claiming organic, but the guy selling next to you is actually certified organic and it's gone through that additional cost, you can about bet that he's going to be the one that's going to put in the complaint and call you in as false labeling. As we talk about meats, there's some inspection considerations to consider. And these are the considerations for North Carolina. I'm not sure if we've got anybody on here that's outside of North Carolina. These generally are going to apply, though I have seen some different combinations come into play between state Department of Agriculture's and local health departments. Here in North Carolina, they kind of have a statewide agreement at the state level that they don't cross jurisdictions any more than they can, but they generally don't. But with red meats, all non-poultry must be killed in an inspected facility in order to sell it. There is no exemption for red meats, and red meats would include cattle, pork, lamb, goat, ostrich and emu, bison, llama, alpaca. All that's going to fall into that category. The levels of inspection are federal, which is USDA Department of Agriculture, and that one can be sold across state lines. If you look on the right side of your screen, this round circle is a USDA mark of inspection. So anytime you pick up a USDA product, it's going to have this on the label at some point, and the establishment number references back to the plant for traceability as to which plant it came from. NCDA has basically the same level of inspection as USDA, but it must be sold within state lines, with the exception of mail order. The trapezoid you see right here on the right-hand side is the NCDA mark of inspection, and the P00 or whatever the plant number will be identified there in the center. And that those two represent that packaged product has been inspected on those levels. The exception on the NCDA is the mail order. NCDA considers as long as if you're setting up and you're selling, just say a beef roast, somebody from state of Washington calls you and says, hey, I would like you to airmail me, overnight me a beef roast, then please drop it in the mail. Anyway, if you do that and they pay for it online and you drop it in the mail, that's considering that the point of sale actually took place in North Carolina, and therefore it was already a sold product when it crossed state lines. Same time, you couldn't take and load up that beef product and drive and set up and meet someone in South Carolina or in Virginia or Tennessee and make the transaction take place outside of state lines. You could meet them at the border, stay on the North Carolina side, and you'd be within the letter of the law. Local health department is, this is basically the same type of inspection that restaurants operate under. And that's that meat sales must sell to the end user. There were some recent changes of interpretation. So a lot of the local butcher shops around do operate under health department inspection. And we had some a notice that came out from NCDA that the USDA food service inspections had made a determination that now they will allow for product produced under the local health department in an inspected facility that is inspected by the local health department can now be sold off-site up until November 9th. I believe it's November 9th of this year. If you had a butcher shop, you were limited to that brick and mortar site unless you had like a food truck type setup that was considered an extension of your shop. But you couldn't take a health department produced meat product and take it out to the farmer's market and set up and sell it. That has now changed, as long as the owner of that meat product must be the one that operates the site. So this is really kind of a big bombshell that is really cool, because what this does open up is, with the amount of commissary kitchens that have come online in the last 10 years for food trucks and those type operations, shared use kitchens, those are now can be options for producers to take their product that is killed in an inspected facility. So if you get a beef killed, you could go pick that beef carcass up, take it to a health department inspected facility, the shared use kitchen or commissary kitchen or your own hole in the wall restaurant you've rented, or if you build, opens up the option of building an inspected kitchen on your farm. It could go in any one of those, at which point it could be cut down, and your sausages, ground beef, cut steaks could be cut and packaged in that health department inspected facility. And then you could now take that packaged product and go off-site and go to a farmer's market, as long as you maintain control. You could not with this take and sell to someone else to resell. If you're going to do retail sales or wholesale sales to someone else that is going to resell that raw product, you would have to still maintain the USDA or NCDA inspection. Health department also has a few limitations. There is what's called the grocery store exemption, which allows health department inspected butcher shops to do a limited amount of wholesale product. It can't exceed a certain percentage of your gross sales, and it's capped somewhere in the neighborhood of about $70,000 a year. Unlike NCDA, USDA inspected product can be sold in unlimited quantities wholesale. The reason I included non-poultry up there about the inspected is we do have a poultry exemption. This is a USDA exemption, but it's recognized in various ways, shapes, and forms by a different state Department of Agriculture. North Carolina has recognized the poultry exemption up to 1,000 birds up till about 10 years ago. And the federal exemption allows for up to 20,000 birds can be killed on the farm per year. And NCDA has recognized that 20,000 bird mark for the last, I guess, about 10 years. They do have some conditions that come through there. register with them. They do an annual inspection of your facilities just to make sure you have something that can be maintained in a clean and clean facilities and easily cleaned, and that you're not killing chickens on an old dirty piece of plywood out behind the barn.
Hey, Lee,
yes.
there is a question there. I want to make sure we don't miss it.
Right.
Does this policy apply to cooked and raw meats?
Yes, the health department, the interpretation that we have gotten is that anything that can be done in that butcher shop can now be done under this law. So butcher shop, I don't know what happened to my little question mark bar, but oops, sorry. But yes, so the anything that can be done there. So bone broth is now a possibility, or bone broth, beef stock, chicken stock, smoked bacon. All those products are fair game now. But you're still going to have to meet the requirements of those local health departments, and they're going to be subject to the, I don't remember which version of the food code is now under use, but be subject to the national food code that guides health department. And within that, some of these operations fall into categories that require what they call a variance. In other words, not addressed directly by the food code for health departments. And so you've got to apply for a variance, which goes before a committee and may take extra time and may require the development of a HACCP plan to address those. But yes, those are definitely available. So enough on that. Yeah, this is a little bit more on that new rule. There's actually a link there to the document. This is the one that went out earlier this month. And that's a couple examples of some butchers from North Carolina Health Department inspected butcher shops, Chop Shop in Asheville on top, and Ross Flynn from Left Bank Butcher in Saxapahaw. So, you know, if you think through the supply chain, which is a lot of what NC Choices works with, it all starts with the farm, then the animal goes to the processor, and then it goes into storage, which this storage may be a third party. This may be back to the farm. It could be owned to your distributor. This distribution may fall to back to the farm. So a lot of this can circle back to the farm, and does on a lot of these small scale operations. But then from the distribution, it goes to the different end user channels, the retailers, wholesale to retailers, retail sales at farmers markets, or wholesale to restaurants. Now, be aware that if you're getting into the meat business and you've not been there before, if you're going to get that animal back from the processor and carry it through any kind of distribution or storage, you will be required to register as a meat handler. So what's a meat handler and how do you become one? If you deal with those products and you are not a inspected operation, then you are required to register. It's real simple. You call the Department of Agriculture at that number and you say, hey, I would like to register as a meat handler. These generally, the meat handlers are your distributors and also largely comprised of a lot of farmer markets. Got a question about the rabbits. I'm not sure you're talking about the rabbit. Okay, so here's what I know about rabbits. Rabbits fell under this exemption up till about 10 years ago. And about the time NCDA acknowledged the poultry exemption, FDA, rabbits have always fell in this kind of gray area that they were FDA or they USDA. Nobody was really sure for a long time. Well, about the time that the Department of Ag picked up the 20,000 limit, FDA said, you know what, all rabbits fall under us. And so a lot of the guys that were doing rabbits now had to meet FDA requirements as far as waste handling and processing facilities. And that put a lot of small rabbit guys out about 10 years ago. As long as these rabbits are processed in a FDA or suitable facility, they should be fair game to. They would be treated just as same as an inspected beef or an inspected poultry or anything else coming into an operation. The meat handler. So look at there's your contact information if you need that. As you can see here, this is the kind of a rise of meat handlers from 20, dang near none in the 2002 to a whole lot. And we were talking with Dr. Beth Young, head of meat and poultry inspection for NCDA a couple weeks ago, and she said they're still fielding several requests every day or every week for meat handlers. So this shows us that local niche meats are on the rise. The bulk of these meat handler numbers are small farms that are direct marketing meats. This data for the meat handler numbers, and a lot of the data we're going to have on here is NC Choices. One of our programs that we've done over the last several years is about every 2 years. Is the meat handler list is public information. So once you're on there, you're actually listed on the list of meat handlers with NCDA. And that way, businesses, if you're dealing with a business, they can verify that you are a meat handler or farmer's market. And so NC Choices, Sarah Blackland, our program coordinator, she, her program director, they have done a project for the last several years where they have called and actually talked to individual meat handlers and polled them with different questions to figure out. That's part of that information that we've gathered to direct our programming. But they've actually polled them as to what they're doing, and a couple of these next few slides are going to show some of the results of those phone interviews. From the meat handler survey, you can see this is kind of 64% of the farms interviewed had beef, and the average number of head that they were slaughtering a year was around 10 head. Pork was on 47% of the farms and at 29 head a week, which is a pretty low volumes all in all. Even at 575 head of poultry per year, they're really small compared to more traditional larger scale agriculture. So some more of that information was producer profitability struggles, most in the early years. And what they found out from these interviews is that about 53% are breaking even or not making any money. But of those that are just at that breaking even point or still losing money have sold meat for about an average of 3 years. And so the 47% that have a small or comfortable profit have sold meat for an average of 7 years. So it shows you that it does take a little bit of time to build up that base and develop your systems. Of all the respondents, 93% said that the niche meat sales have had a positive impact on their business. As you can see, for those of y'all that are working with SBCs, the statewide data shows the top areas of need requested by people in these were marketing, business tools, and production training. And so this is a good opportunity for those involved with small business centers to help out with developing those business plans and marketing plans, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So somebody comes to you and they say, so you want a farm, there's everything you need to learn to be a farmer. That might be the version number one. But the thing to do is you got to figure out, is this something that the people are capable of, or are you capable of if you're the one wanting to do it, and recognize that this can be a lifestyle. And there was his dad, what's a day off? I don't know, son, we're farmers. That's actually a pretty accurate little meme. Some of the challenges of niche meats is the higher inputs are naturally going to result in higher price points. And so you're going to be selling something that you're going to have more in than if your pound of hamburger, you're naturally going to have more money tied up in it, need a higher price point than the grocery store may on their $2 hamburger. Having sufficient capital is a really big hurdle for a lot of new producers, especially when you consider that it may take anywhere from 6 weeks for a batch of meat chickens to mature to up to 3 years with a grass-fed or a fed steer to actually have a product to sell. And so during that period of production time, you have to have enough working capital on there to keep yourself afloat and pay the bills and do well there. It can be a real challenge, and especially in a lot of rural areas, is trying to find customers that are willing to pay that premium. Generally, you can find customers willing to pay the premium about everywhere. It's a matter of finding enough of them. Volume makes a big difference in how well business can play out. Processing still a bottleneck, can be especially a bottleneck for the new meat handlers, because a lot of them are running pretty close to capacity, and so their ability to take on new meat handlers can be limited at some point. And then the last, which is the key to, if you ask anybody that's been in this business for any length of time, is selling all of the animal. It's easy to sell the ribeyes, it's easy to sell some hamburger, but it's what getting rid of every piece of that animal is where you make the money. So why does local meat cost more? So we've got 2 different supply chain models. This is kind of a commercial or integrated industrial agriculture type model, where like Tyson Foods, the reason it's called vertically integrated is because pretty much the whole process is owned by one company, versus a local meat supply chain where every step along the way is owned by different companies. And so at this point, if Tyson's goal is to make $1 per bird, then they can make that at any given point in this whole system. So if they can break even at distribution and processing and feed and raising the chickens and paying the farmer, then they can make their profit at that $1 a bird at the sales point, or they can make it down here on the feed. They can make it wherever they can make it at the moment. If you look at the local supply chain, what happens is what happens when each of those steps needs to make $1. So you've added $1 at the farm, $1 for the baby chick supplier, $1 per chicken for the feed guy, and the processing distribution. And so you have a net effect of about 6 times your amount of money. Or 6 times the cost. Now, if you look at the commercial integrated model, what you also will see here is that of these 2 blocks, the top and the bottom, these are actually the only 2 places where they, say Tyson or one of the other big companies, actually does not own the facilities at either place. So they contract with farms and they generally contract with the retailers. And that's because those are your 2 most capital intensive places. The number of farms that are required to do that, it requires a lot of land, it requires a lot of labor, it requires a lot of capital investment, and the same on the retail end. Those are also probably where your biggest risk is. So it's really a good model to look at, and that they're able to control everything here where they can be real efficient and then have the variables on contract. Excuse me. So if you're looking to farm, or you've got somebody looking to farm, determine the goals. I always told everybody when we were working with the NC Farm School that there's always a big difference between trying to make a little extra money to go out to eat once a week, or go to the beach once a year, or make a car payment or pay for some gas. That's a big difference in goals between that and actually trying to make a living. But you need to sit down and with whoever you're working with and determine what resources you actually have available. And labor and capital, once again, we're back to that capital, having enough working money or working credit there that can make it work and finance the operation or access to such. But labor is the other part. There's a lot of people get into small farming. It's great. It's, a lifestyle. They're going to love it. And then them and their family or them and their kids are going to do this. And then before too long, everybody's burnt out because everybody is literally working about 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the farm implodes on itself. And the same thing with the capital is if you don't have the actual capital on hand to finance it and get everything in place and take on those expenses, then what happens is you get 6 months in, you run out of money and you're trying to sell your tractor to make some payments because you got a payment coming due. And that's been the downfall of a lot of small farms too. Determine your suitable enterprises, figure out what would actually work, what big operation would work best on your farm. What are you suited for? You may not have the land for beef, but you may be able to raise some chickens, or you may have plenty of land for beef and you don't really want to fool with a few chickens. Determining where you're going to sell and what those possible price points. And you can't base, like I said, you can't base those in the niche meat business off of just what everybody else at the grocery store is doing, because your expenses are going to be a whole lot more. So building a business plan will give you a basis for getting a grasp on what those costs are going to be and what your expenses will be going forward, so you can appropriately price that. And there's great opportunities. You got the small business centers. There are also several places like NC Farm School, Farm Credit, Appalachian Sustainable Ag Project, that all offer multi-week business planning courses that actually are tailored to the business of farming. The business of farming is definitely a little bit different than, say, building a retail business, where you don't have quite the variables that you do in farming. So if you're gonna get into this, or you're gonna advise somebody to get into this, they need to have an understanding of how that animal makes it from farm to plate, and the production practices. Those variables right there all make a difference. I hear people all the time say, "Oh, I'm just going to raise pigs. I can buy pigs, feeder pigs off of Craigslist for $20 a piece." Instead of paying $80 from somebody with really good genetics down the road. So, a pig is not a pig is not a pig. And just like, a bottle of Boone's Farm wine is not the same as a $100 bottle from a fine French chalet. And so this can actually make a big difference in your end product. And if you're going to focus on this and you're going to charge somebody a premium, this has always been our philosophy at our farm and our butcher shop, is we're going to charge a premium. We've got to bring a premium product to the market that makes people appreciate the fact that they're getting their money's worth out of it. And so these are all big factors that play in that people often overlook for the sake of money. And developing a familiarity with cuts of meats and how to cook them. If you're going to sell them, you need to know how to cook them. And that's one of the things we've always done at the markets, is had it in the back of our head, so that if it was us or somebody selling for us, that any cut we sell, we should automatically be able to give you at least a very basic recommendation on how to cook that cut or what to do with it. This is another reference sheet, and this talks a little bit about yields for the animals and what you can expect to get back. So when you kill an animal, it's a live weight is the weight of that live animal on the hoof. So if you got a 300-pound animal, so we'll use the example of a pig here, this first one. So once that pig has been killed and eviscerated and the blood's out of it and it's going in the cooler as a whole, that's now the hot carcass weight. And that's going to be about 70%. So if you're at a 300-pound live weight pig, that means you're going to end up with about 210 pounds of carcass weight. And if you go down here, you're going to lose, as you move it down the steps here, you're going to lose a little bit at every step. So once it goes from the carcass through the butcher, you're going to have pieces of meat that can't be used. You're going to have sinew and gristle and stuff that are cut out and discarded, bone that goes unused. And so your carcass weight's going to be reduced down. So if you got, I think the example here is 176 pounds of carcass weight, and by the time you take all the bones and the skin and everything out, you got actually 123 pounds of meat to sell. And then in step 3, if you take that one more step and you do something like bacon or dry aging, you can have further losses. So those all need to be accounted for whenever you're pricing out your product, so that if you're basing, you can adjust your numbers at every step you add to the process. As far as marketing and general knowing how that animal gets from farm to fork, NC Choices has a website, and we have lots of good resources. Like I said before, we're under the Center for Environmental Farming System. So if you go to our website, you'll find that we're under one of the programs. And so over here on the right-hand side of our website, there are links to references. And in those references, we have things like a frequently asked questions sheet for beginning niche meat producers you can access. This is one that we recently put together about selecting what pasture-based enterprises might be right for your farm. And it's just basically a worksheet you can work through to give you some suggestions on what might be suitable. We do have a full library of video resources here. You can see they offer they're everything from how to buy in bulk to quality pasture management, value-added products packaging, and they're all short, a few minute videos that you can go on there and watch. We've developed a few other marketing tools as far as breaking down and assessing the cost and helping beginning farmers, as well as a lot of our farmers are using these as point of sale materials so that they can show consumers why their stuff costs more than going to the grocery store. And we've developed those for poultry, pork, and beef. We also work really closely with other programs at SEFs. Amazing Grazing is one that with Dr. Matt Poor at NC State and Johnny Rogers at NC State that are working to develop grazing skills and forage programs throughout the state. They do some really good workshops, so they're a good group to follow up on. We work really closely with the Meat and Poultry Inspection Division at NCDA. This is a shot of their website, and this is where you'll find all of those information sheets over here. There's one from talks about the link for getting the meat handlers. There's a list of plants that will do further processing. The niche meat processors, NPAM, has a lot of good resources for a wide variety of meat-related topics. This is a new program that we're working with. Matt LaRue out of Cornell University, he's been working to develop some different tools that can be used by farmers as well as by consumers around bulk buying and doing some pricing and stuff with niche meats. And this is their calculator. So you can go in, if you're a beginning farm and you want to figure out what you can sell, you just go in, follow the instructions, and you can figure out, so what marketing channels are you pricing for? Are you going to go to the farmers markets or CSAs or restaurants, grocery stores? And then are you going to be basing your pricing off the cuts or the hanging weight? So if you're selling a whole steer or a whole pig, you might want to sell it on hanging weight and let the consumer or customer pick up the processing. But if you're doing cuts, that'll be a different model than doing that. And then you enter your cost of production, and it'll give you an estimate on what you can expect to have in a per cut basis. So USDA also has a new farmers website with lots of nice resources. And if you're going to be in the meat business, old vet I worked for up in the mountains years ago gave me some of the best advice for making money in the livestock business. So always buy low and always sell high, and always remember that you can feed yourself into a loss, but you'll never starve yourself into a profit. And that's my words of wisdom there. So Laura had mentioned in the introduction that NC Choices has a new project that we're working on. This is a USDA Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Grant, and we're working to address land access issues for beginning farmers, and beginning farmers, once again, being those that have been in business less than 10 years. And we're focusing on some new and more exciting areas of grazing animals, and that's in silvopasture and solar, and also working with land trust on conservation farms. A lot of land is tied up in conservation trust through land trust or conservancies, and there's a lot of land going into solar panel farms these days. Those y'all that didn't know, North Carolina is actually number 2 in amount of solar electricity output, as well as total acreage of solar panels. So this is a rapidly changing landscape, and so we're going to work around working on some of those opportunities to get young farmers access to land where they may have issues competing in more traditional venues. In silvopastures, along the same lines, and silvopastures been around for years, but it's just another way of double cropping or making greater use of an existing resource. So you're able to graze where you're actually growing timber, and hopefully add a value to that land. So once again, there's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I'll be glad to help you out. And I guess we'll open it up for questions there.
Thank you, Lee. We do have a question from Yancey County. At their tractor facility, at their food hub, they have a meat handling license, and those of us with meat handling licenses, the people there with meat handling licenses are using their freezer for them to market their products. Would that also apply to health inspection facility in addition to USDA NCDA inspection?
I'm sorry. So would having the meat handlers?
So the members of the tractor facility have a meat handling license, and they're using the freezer there at Tractor, and Tractor is selling their meat, right?
Yeah.
So do they need a health inspection at their facility in addition to the USDA NCDA inspection?
No, if they're just storing and handling it. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my contact information. There we go. If they're just storing meat, and the meat is processed off-site and it's packaged and labeled, then that's where the meat handler's license comes into play. You wouldn't, if you're not doing any opening of packages and further processing or doing any breakdown or packaging of product, then you wouldn't be required to have any kind of inspection past that. The understanding we've got, and like I said, this whole thing with the county health department has come up quickly and has been subject to a lot of back and forth between us and NCDA and producers trying to figure out exactly what the terms of coverage are going to be. The shared kitchen uses was specifically posed to us, that if you're using somewhere like that, then They would have to be, the facility would be under county inspection. So it would have a sanitation grade from a county inspector, just like a restaurant. Now, under that facility, the word we've gotten from NCDA is that if they're going to process meats there, that facility is going to have a HACCP plan. We didn't really touch on HACCP planning, but HACCP is hazard analysis critical control points assessment plan. And what you're doing is looking at and say, all right, what can go wrong in this scenario? Where can meat become contaminated? And at each of those places where that's likely to happen, you address it with controls. And so if you're bringing meat in from an inspected facility where it's killed to be processed, it could be contaminated along the way or not held at proper temperature. So that would be a critical control point where it comes in the door, and you would inspect it for wholesomeness as well as monitor the temperature and make sure it hasn't exceeded a safe temperature. That would be an example of a critical control point. Our understanding is that the facility, if HACCPs are required by the processes, the facility would have to have a HACCP plan, and the contracting producer would have to have a HACCP plan addressing specifically what they were doing. So if you had a facility that was going to have people processing beef, pork, chicken, and making bacon and bone broth and those things, the facility would have to have a plan that encompasses everybody that's coming and going and working under their facility. The individual producer, if you're coming in and you're just bringing a box of inspected bones and you're going to make bone broth, you would only have to have the HACCP or documentation pertaining to making a bone broth. You wouldn't be required to have that HACCP for cutting up chickens and making chicken sausage. But the next guy coming in the door with a whole pig to break down and make sausage out of would be required to have a HACCP to cover his operations. Does that make sense?
Okay. We've got another question. Who tracks the meat handler's application? Where does that data come from?
So the meat handlers is all all those records are kept with North Carolina Department of Ag. And so, like I said, that information is on their website. If you want to go look and see who's a meat handler and who's not, you can look it up on there. The information in the slide, as far as the numbers of meat handlers, that was directly off of their information from contiguous years of tracking those numbers. So yeah, that falls to NCDA to do that. And with the meat handler's license, if you become a meat handler, you do get inspected on a yearly basis. And they're going to send a compliance officer out to make sure that you're dealing with everything properly, that you have properly labeled stuff in your freezer or coolers, and that you're not holding anything in questionable facilities.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions, but before we do that, I'm going to put this poll up, and I'm going to ask everybody to answer these two questions for us, and then Lee will answer the last two questions that we have from the audience. So if y'all could quickly do that, we will wrap up with these other questions. Lee, can you see that question from Libby?
Not right at the moment.
So click your chat button on the bottom, and you also have that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen.
Here we go. Yeah, okay, so
let's give folks we're almost 100% completed. A few more folks need to vote or fill out the poll, and then you can answer that question, please. All righty, go ahead.
Okay, so thanks for the question, Libby. That's a fun one. So Libby's in Colorado, and she asked about the challenges of having with pasture access due to huge influx of gentlemen ranchers who are purchasing large swaths of land, taxes, ag operations, and running a bare minimum of cattle. Will we be doing anything to educate those with our land access work? Libby, that is one of those yeah, all-time challenges in agriculture is how do you balance those that are actually trying to make a living farming with those that are the investment people that are coming in, and this is one of those places where there's really not much you can do about it other than try to work with those quote unquote hobby farmers the best you can. We'll be working with them as we run across them. We do with the solar projects. Those do tend to be owned and operated by larger investment similar type situations. But yeah, it'd be a similar type thing because there's solar panels. A lot of the timberland is also the same way. It's investment property that's being maintained under agricultural operations. And so this is kind of how it'll tie back in is hopefully by getting young farmers access to some of that land that'll put working land back in the working farmers' hands. So, no, that's not a real direct answer, but yeah. The next questions is about processing your own meat and packaging for resale. And do you have to have weight people on your scale? Yes, you do. So anytime you sell anything off a scale and dollars changed hands based on that weight, you have to have that scale certified on a yearly basis by the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. And if you go to their division weights and standards division, they have a phone number there you can call and just say, hey, I've got some scales that I need to get certified. Tell them where you're at, and they'll send one of their their scale checkers out. They have them in all the counties. Sometimes it's just a matter of wait until they're in your area for a rotation, which I've never had take more than a couple weeks. But yes, you will have to have that certification.
All right. Well, thank you, Lee, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. I want to give y'all a reminder that this will be shared with you. You'll receive an email with a link to the PDF and the YouTube once we do a little bit of editing. But NC Choices is going to be around to continue to support the niche meat marketing in North Carolina. We really do have an amazing national model, and now we're working with some other national models to share some fantastic information for this industry. So thank you all, and thank you, Lee, and look for an email from us with these links so that you can continue to share this information with your peers and colleagues. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.